Thank you so much for the introduction, and thank you so much to all of you for coming out today to discuss how AI disrupts the law. This is actually the shortest summary of my day job. That's basically what I do on a daily basis, is wonder how new technologies, including AI, are disrupting the law. I don't have to do this by myself. I'm very lucky that I have fantastic people who support me in that. I lead the research group that is called Get the Governance of Emerging Technologies, and those are the folks that are currently working with us. We just recruited 4 new people, so the whole group is growing. And what we all have in common is that we care about the governance of emerging technologies, so how we can actually do that. If you're interested in the topic and the people that I work with and the project that we have, you can visit our homepage and find more information about the research that we're doing. But yeah, let's get started. There are 3 areas that I would like to discuss today, where I think we can see that AI is disrupting the law as well as society. Those 3 areas have to do with misinformation, discrimination, and workplace automation. I didn't realize it rhymes, but it does, and it's also true. So those are the 3 areas that I would like to discuss and just show a little bit how I think that AI is really, really causing trouble in a way, and what we can do about it. But let's start with the first one, which is misinformation and AI. I think everybody will be aware that algorithms cause a lot of trouble when it comes to misinformation. Some people say that we are in a post-truth society, that we can't actually trust anything anymore that we see online. And I think one of the most important examples of that was probably the Cambridge Analytica case in 2018, as everybody will be aware of, where we saw that algorithms and platforms were complicit in trying to shift voting behavior, had impact on elections around the world, including the UK and the US. But this was not the peak of how technology started to impact public opinion and spread misinformation. During the COVID crisis, we saw another very troubling example where President Trump told people that they should drink bleach in order to prevent a COVID infection. Not only is that type of treatment ineffective, it's also very dangerous, and some people did actually die. But this information was spread on social media very quickly, and people believed it to be true and followed that advice. Similar advice was also followed during the insurrection of the Capitol in January 2021, where social media platforms were used to incite violence. And I think it's not just a problem in terms of violence that was acted, but also just to storm the Capitol, the symbol of democracy, is really, really troubling just from a democratic perspective, to see how technology can actually have a real-life impact, not just on the health of people, but also on our symbols of democracy. But not just democracy and physical health, also the planet suffers because of misinformation. There's a lot of misinformation about climate change out there. I think most people will be aware that climate change is a fact, but if it wasn't for social media and other types of algorithmic dissemination methods, we wouldn't still discuss whether climate change is a fact or not. We would actually do something about it. So you can see that social media really has a role to play when it comes to misinformation and impact in public opinion. But is it new? Is that something that has never happened before? Haven't we always had type of misinformation? And that reminds me of a wonderful quote that Mark Twain once said. He said, "History may not repeat itself, but it rhymes." Fun fact is that Mark Twain never said that. So this is an example of fake news that is 200 years old, basically. You could say that's not too bad. It's a good quote. It's a true quote. I wouldn't have problem having this associated with my name, but it is an example of how things have been spread that are not true. But I'm going to give you 3 historical examples of the past that show type of misinformation that is actually pretty harmful and was really harmful for people. So the first one that I have here is Elizabeth I. I think everybody in this room will know who this person is. She had a very interesting rumor attached to her personality. People said that she was actually a man. There was a rumor that was spread about her. She was a very popular ruler. She kept peace in the country. She was a supporter of the arts and sciences. She advanced education. She ensured economic prosperity. Of course, such a ruler can't possibly be a woman. It must, of course, be a man. Another very, very rumor that hasn't left our public sphere is one that Marie Antoinette had to fight with. The thing that she's most famous for, the quote, "let them eat cake," is the thing that she actually never said. And yet it is the thing that is, to this day, attached to her name. And it's over 300 years old. The fact is that it was a rumor that Jean-Jacques Rousseau actually spread about her. He was an activist, a politician, a philosopher, very much interested in furthering the French Revolution, and so he was spreading rumors about her. She did a lot of things that were problematic, but she never said that, for example. But Marie Antoinette did not only have to deal with rumors, she also had to deal with pictures or paintings or drawings that were spread about her. So here you can see Marie Antoinette in close embrace with one of her favorite ladies-in-waiting. And the rumor was spread that she had a romantic relationship with her and that she was unfaithful to her husband. Of course, none of that was true. But again, an idea of fake news, misinformation, that is also 300 years old. Misinformation that is almost 3,000 years old goes back to this gentleman. This is Nero, that is said to have burned down Rome while playing the fiddle. Again, something he never actually did. He wasn't even in the city during the big burn of Rome, let alone was able to play the fiddle. But he was a very unpopular ruler. Some historians have compared him to Geoffrey Baratheon of the antiquity. He was a very, very unkind ruler. He tortured his opponents, he killed his own mother, and he castrated his lover. So people just wanted to get rid of him. He was very, very unpopular. So people started spreading this information about him. Nero, in turn, tried to pin it on the Christians. So everybody was tossing around that hot potato of guilt, and nobody wanted to take the blame for it. Well, that gets us to the core question, which is, what is truth then? Like, how can we know that anything is true if we apparently have always had trouble to figuring out what is true? And here I want to cite an example, a modern example that we currently have, which is the flat earth movement. Yeah, I already see a couple of people grinning, which is the reaction that I want, because everybody kind of thinks this idea is somewhat ridiculous, right? You have people that believe that the earth is not in fact round, it is flat. People believe there's a conspiracy against them, that they have been lied to, that in fact the earth is flat. And many people ridicule that. It's a minority of people that we kind of laugh at because we think, I mean, come on, how can you stand up against established dogma and science? That's quite ridiculous. This is also how Galileo Galilei must have felt in the 17th century, when he also stood up against dogma and the established sciences and religion. He, in fact, believed that the earth circles around the sun and not the other way around. He paid for it, actually. He was put on the house arrest for 8 years until his death because he started to criticize what established theories about science had to say. Coming back to a more recent example, this is also something where people start laughing when they see it, but it was necessary during the COVID crisis to issue such warnings to tell people, please do not drink bleach. It is harmful, it is problematic, it might injure you, it might kill you, in fact. And here again, people start to laugh about this and say, I don't understand how you cannot trust doctors. Why would you even listen to somebody like President Trump when they give advice like that? Obviously, we should always listen to the experts that have something to say on it. But you could ask, was it always smart to believe our experts? Was it always the right decision? And here I want to remind you of the very interesting practice of bloodletting, which is a medical method that was deployed for more than 3,000 years. So it was a method where you would cut a person let blood out of them because you would believe that you can cure certain illnesses with it. You would bloodlet in order to cure hysteria, depression, and it was only banned in the late 19th century. But obviously, it's not just ineffective, but also dangerous. So you could say, well, okay, why did I come here? Why did I come to this lecture if we have always struggled with truth and always struggled with lies? Is there anything new under the sun? How is technology any different? Aren't we just dealing with the same problems? Of course, I believe it's different this time. And so I'm going to spend the rest of the lecture convincing you that it is a little bit different. And again, I want to come back to something that Mark Twain said. He said, a lie can travel halfway around the world while the truth is still putting its shoes on. But of course, Mark Twain didn't say that. That's another fake news about him. Again, not a bad one, also a really good quote. I wouldn't mind having that attached to me either. And it rings true, right? It rings really true. And I think that is one of the 3 reasons why I think AI is different in terms of spreading misinformation. It has to do with the speed. It has to do with the scale. You know, people in the 19th and 18th century, they didn't have the means to disseminate information as quickly as we can do now, let alone people who lived 2,000 years ago. Like Rousseau actually had to put some effort into it to convince people that Marie Antoinette was eating cake all the time. But nowadays we are in a situation where everybody has a microphone and they get a stage. And Facebook, for example, has roughly 3 billion users at this present. And people like Alex Jones or President Trump have millions of followers where they can just spread their information. And I think that's just something that is different. The second thing that is different is how convincing they are when they lie, when algorithms start lying to us. So here's a very interesting example. You can see 4 paintings of Rembrandt here, one of which is fake. One of those paintings, one of those portraits, wasn't actually done by Rembrandt. One of them was created by an artificial intelligence. So we'll play a game now. You're going to pick the fake one. I'm going to give everybody a couple of seconds to decide which of those 4 portraits is the fake one. Okay? Here's the solution. This is the fake one. Regardless if you picked it or not, it's still really convincing. It really looks good, which is quite amazing what algorithms can do. And you could rightly say, it's a painting. Who cares, really? What's the societal harm that could potentially happen of having somebody confuse paintings? That's not really bad. But what would you say if the same is done with faces? Let's play the same game again. Look at those 4 faces and pick the one that is fake. I'm going to give you a couple seconds. Have you picked the one that is fake? The solution is all of them are fake. None of those people do actually exist, but they're very, very convincing in a way. And this is just pictures. If you pair pictures with sound and movement, you can end up in a situation like this.
What's up, TikTok? You guys cool if I play some sports? I love it. More for the audio experience. As much as the momentum. Hey, listen up, sports and TikTok fans. If you like what you're seeing, just wait till what's coming next.
This is not Tom Cruise. This is completely artificially generated. Not only is his face not real, they also were able to fake his voice, what is really, really convincing and really, really good. We can imagine what a technology will be capable in a couple of years' time. And again, you could say it's Tom Cruise, it's a public figure. What really does it mean? But yes, this is, an actor that is deep fake. But what if the same happens if it's done a political leader? If it's somebody that is a politician, a head of state, and algorithms start to put words in their mouths. What does it mean for society? What does it mean for peace? So that's definitely a different issue than we had in the past. course, ChatGPT came along. I think it has been roughly a year or so when OpenAI opened its door to everybody, and everybody could experience what algorithms are able to do and how they can generate text that is quite convincing. And they can do a lot of interesting writing. They can do actually academic writing. I'm not giving any tips here for students, but you can actually just put a prompt in ChatGPT and ask it to write an academic essay for you. And not too bad, actually. It actually looks quite convincing. But that also comes at a cost, right? What does it mean for education if professors are no longer able to assess whether the homework or the essays are authentic or if they have been generated by artificial intelligence? And what does it mean for a society if we cannot trust that the students actually learned the things that they were supposed to learn at university, especially if those students become doctors or psychologists or lawyers or architects, where they make very important decisions, sometimes life-changing decisions, if we cannot be sure anymore that they actually studied as they should. But that's not only an issue for academia in terms of education, it's also a problem for academia in terms of science, because ChatGPT is also able to write academic papers, quite interestingly. And so there was an interesting experiment that was done this year in January, where a couple of abstracts, 2 batches of abstracts were sent out to expert peer reviewers. One batch of the abstract was done by experts, by professors, by scientists. The other batch was completely fake and generated. And the human experts, were only able to detect the fake ones in 68% of the time, which is not a lot. It's a bit better than chance. And that's not really good for the scientific community, not just because science needs to be true, but also because we use science to make policy. In fact, that's what we want. We want policy making that is based on evidence, that is based on scientific methods. But if the scientists can be fooled, how can we make sure that we actually write good laws that deal with climate change, that deal with pandemics and things like that, if the experts don't really know what's going on anymore? So we have those 2 different things. We have the scope and the reach is different. We have the fact that it's much more convincing than traditional ways of lying. And then the third one that we have has to do with the silence around the algorithms. Algorithms, we don't hear them, we don't see them, we don't feel them, we don't smell them, but they're here. They're always here, they're around us. They're not as motivated and loud as Rousseau, who walks in and is like, oh my God, Marie Antoinette, can you believe what you did today? Where you understand he is a politician, he has an agenda, you know what he's after. I don't know what an algorithm is up to. I don't understand what they're doing. I don't even see them and hear them. But they're still pulling the strings behind the scenes. And they're doing that in a way where they put us in filter bubbles, right? They put us in filter bubbles. Every time you interact with digital technology, what it does is it learns about you. It learns very quickly who you are, what you like, what ethnicity you have, what sexual orientation you have, who you voted for, and whether you're religious or not. And based on that information, everything is tailored for you. We think we have a shared reality online, but we don't. We have a fragmented reality. So everything I see is different from what you see. The prices I see on Amazon, the posts on Facebook, the tweets on Twitter, the search engine results, they are all tailored for me. They're all not the same for everybody. It's not like a newspaper where everybody sees the same. But the issue is, the statistics show that people don't know about that. 80 to 90% of people believe that what they see on Google is neutral, that everybody sees the same search results, that everybody sees truth and an objective reality, when in fact, we don't have that anymore. But what we do know is how algorithms do that. And we know that since the leaks, the Facebook leaks in October 21, where we started to see behind the curtains of big tech companies and to understand a little bit better how their business model works. Their business model works in a way where they capitalize on the attention economy. The idea is to keep you on the platform for as long as possible because eyeballs means advertisement revenue. So they have to find out ways to keep you engaged. And the Facebook leaks showed that the research suggests that the thing that keeps people engaged is not rainbows and unicorns, it's toxic content. It is content that are rumors, scandalous, lies, things that make you angry, things that make you angry in a way. Nobody wants to see pleasant content. It doesn't keep people as engaged. So we have those algorithms that on purpose give us information that is very, very upsetting just because it keeps us engaged. But we don't know about it, we don't feel it, because we don't even know that we're in this bubble. The other thing that algorithms are doing is they only show us part of the voices that are actually on the internet. So content moderation algorithms that are tasked to take down toxic content are seen to be very biased, unfortunately. So algorithms think that content that is created by people of color or people from the LGBTQ community is more toxic than the content of white cis people. But again, we don't see that. We don't know about that. And that is a big issue. This is why it makes the spread of misinformation and tailored misinformation just very, very different. First point, why I do think that AI is very different than regular type of misinformation. It leads us also to the second part where I think that AI is different and is disrupting the legal framework that we have. And so that's the second point, fairness and AI. Fairness in AI is a big, big topic. And it is a big topic because of how the technology works. In a very simple way, if you just ask the question, how does an algorithm work? It is looking at the past, trying to predict the future. That's all it does. And to give you an example, let's just say I want to hire a law professor at Oxford, and I want to use an algorithm to help me with that. The thing that I would do is I would feed into the algorithm all the historical information that I have about past hires, so everybody who has held those positions in the past. I would feed the algorithms with past reference letters, their grades, their status letters, and would task the algorithm to create a profile. I would ask the algorithm, what do all those people who were law professors at Oxford do they have in common? Create a profile for me. Because those people were good law professors, so they must have something that is special about them. So please make me this ideal profile of the historical data that I have from the last 20, 40, 60, 100 years. And so what will happen is the algorithm will come up with that profile of that past information. And then a new person will apply for that job. And the algorithm will say, well, do you look similar to that profile? If you do, you get invited to a job interview. If you don't, you're going to be rejected. So let's think about who has been a law professor at Oxford in the last 20, 40, 60, 100, almost 1,000 years. It is probably somebody that is middle-aged, white, British, and a man. So I wouldn't have gotten the job at all. So I'm quite happy that at Oxford we still decide with humans when it comes to hiring decisions. But that is the problem, right? When you take data from the past, that is unfair. And almost all data is somewhat unfair. You will transport the past inequalities into the future. And that is a problem. And that is a problem that we already know and already see and had to deal with in the past. Just two examples that really show that it's not just an academic problem, it is a real life problem. So in my home country, in Austria, the employment agency did try to use an algorithm to help decide what kind of support should be offered to people who are currently unemployed. And they used historical data as well to help them make that decision in a fairer, more objective way. And what did happen is that the algorithm did start discriminating against people that were older, people living with disabilities and women. It would reflect the unfairness of the job market, again, transporting it into the future. Here in the UK, we have a similar problematic example with the Ofquam algorithm in 2020. During the pandemic, it wasn't possible to have the A-levels together, so we had to move the whole thing online. So instead of sitting in a room and taking you A-levels, Ofquam designed an algorithm to predict the grade you would have gotten if you had been able to sit the exam. And what did happen, quite unsurprisingly, is that it definitely started to disadvantage against students of color and students who are not at independent schools. And again, the class system and the unequal access to education that we have in the UK was picked up by the algorithm and then reflected in the grades that were given to the students. So you see that the unfairness presides here as well. But then you could say, rightly, well, that's not new either, right? Discrimination has always happened. Let's just use non-discrimination law to deal with that, because after all, that is there to protect us from that type of discrimination. Yes, and some of it is helpful, but also algorithms group us in a way and judge us in a way that humans would never think about. So they might find out that you are a dog owner, that you own a dog, and they use this information to show you certain products online. They might find out that you're a sad teenager, which is something that Facebook and Twitter did, I think, and they were shown certain content. They might find out that you are a gambler, or that you are a single parent, or that you are a video gamer. And they use this type of information to make decisions about you, right? And you could say, what's the big problem? Like, who cares? That's not the same as traditional discrimination. Why would anybody care about those new groups? Well, for example, if you lived in China, you would care about that. So in China, the social credit scoring system exists. That means that the Chinese government is deploying a scheme where they take privately and publicly available data, use an algorithm to decide who is a good citizen, quote unquote, good citizen. If you get a high social credit score, that means very good things for you. It means that you get better offers in supermarkets. If you are a bad citizen, it might mean that you're no longer allowed to leave the country. In China, being a video gamer makes your social score drop. So all of a sudden, being a video gamer causes negative consequences, even though that's not something that a human would usually do, because that's not how we think about people. We would never use that type of criteria or grouping to make decisions about people. But we don't have to look to China to see those examples. Those examples are here right now in Europe and in the Western culture as well. So we already know for 10 years that if you're buying stuff online and you use an Apple machine to do so, you will pay higher prices. So you're being discriminated based on the type of machine that you use. If you were to apply for insurance in the Netherlands, you will pay higher rates if your address has only a number in it, whereas people who have a number and a letter pay lower rates. So that's a criterion to discriminate against people. A piece of advice for people who are thinking of applying for a job. If you are applying for a job and you have to submit your application online, please do use a browser like Chrome or Firefox. Do not use Internet Explorer or Safari, because if you do that, you're more likely to get rejected. If you apply for a loan online, what will happen is that the speed at which you scroll through the application as well as the fact whether you use capital letters or not, has an impact on whether you get the loan or not. When applying for a job, your face might actually be the reason why you get the job. Face recognition software is running over your face, is determining how fast your retina moves, how much sweat you have on your forehead, the pitch of your voice, how you gesture, and that has an impact on whether or not you get an interview or if you even get the job. But it's not just in the workplace. We do the same in education, where eye tracking software is used to decide if somebody's gifted or not. So we just look at how their eye is moving and determining whether they should be put in advanced classes or not. So it's not things that you write on a piece of paper, it's how your eye moves that makes the difference. And lastly, your emotions. They play a role as well. There is a lot of face recognition software that is being used during interviews to infer whether you're happy or sad or angry in order to infer if you're enthusiastic about a job or not. And that's, again, just how your face moves, the pitch of your voice, things like that. People at border controls use that technology. Doctors use it for diagnoses. And HR uses it to monitor, to figure out what your mood is during a business call. So those types of groups are all of a sudden here, but they're very different than traditional groups, right? We have those two types of new groups that we start discriminating against. We have those groups, like weird groups like dog owners or internet explorers or video gamers, and those really incomprehensible groups like how I move my mouse, how fast I scroll, what kind of letters I use, how fast my retina is moving. But obviously, none of those groups are protected under the law. Why would they? They never needed our protection at all. Non-discrimination law focuses on things like ethnicity and gender, sexual orientation, ability, age, but sad people, Apple users, fast retina movers, slow scrollers, those people don't find any protection. Yet, they are the basis for decision-making for very important decisions in our society. And the law is not prepared for it, because it never had to be. So if you're interested in this topic in more detail, I wrote a very long paper on this. Can't go into detail there, but if you're interested in that question, you can download it for free. So those are the first two ones, how I think that AI is disrupting the law and society, because misinformation is different, because discrimination is different, and because I think the workplace is different as well. This is the third one. With all the things that we have discussed, you could rightly ask, what does it mean for our job market? If you have an algorithm that is, twice as fast at half the cost, is your job still safe? And that's an interesting topic, and I think a topic that is not really discussed in public at all anymore. Last time we heard about this was roughly in 2016, where people were predominantly worried that robotics would take over manual labor, which is an absolute justified worry, and it did, but it was a very short discussion and it never actually resulted in any interesting results. But now we're in a situation where it's not just jobs that have to do with manual labor, it is other types of jobs that might be at risk as well. Because it's not just the manual stuff that AI can do. AI can do a wide range of things, right? It can write poetry. It can write screenplays. We saw how it can produce paintings, like the Rembrandt one. You can use ChatGPT to write a press release, to summarize a policy report, or to do legal drafts. We saw it can do scientific articles. AI can even write its own code. And so what does that mean for artists, doctors, journalists, lawyers, office workers, scientists, or even coders, if part of their job can be automated? And again, you could say, well, this is not a new thing. Technology has always displaced and replaced some of the work, but it's different because we never had a technology that was disrupting so many sectors at the same time. We never had a technology that puts artists and doctors and journalists and office workers at risk at the same time. And so that is something where I think we need to worry about, and the legal framework needs to adjust to it. Of course, you can say, and this is also something that often comes up, well, some jobs might go away, but others will come in its place, and that's very often something that comes from industry. But if you look at the recent news, that might not actually be true. Recently, in May, IBM issued a public statement where they said they're not going to hire specific back office workers anymore. They're going to replace them with AI, which means that roughly 8,000 people are going to not be hired anymore. And if you look at other tech companies, from Twitter to Facebook to Amazon to any of the big ones, you will see that they had let a lot of their staff go. So the question of will it actually generate new jobs is unclear at this point. So here we are. Here are the three topics. How I think that AI is changing the law and is changing society. So after I took the first half to scare everybody, I also want to talk about solutions and what can be done about it, if anything. And so here we are in a little bit of a good news, bad news situation in terms of proposed solutions. I want to say the bad news is that I think at the moment we are focusing on the wrong type of solution. So again, with ChatGPT, when that thing came around, which was roughly in November, very soon after, roughly in March or so, there were a couple of public letters, open letters, that were calling to stop that type of technology, to pause it for a little bit so we can catch up with our legal and ethical thinking around it. At first, this sounds good, right? It sounds very good that we say, oh, this is a technology that is unprecedented in a way, it's very disruptive, let's do something about it. But the interesting thing is, if you look exactly on what that letter has in mind, I'm not exactly sure that it's worrying about the right thing. So if you look at the wording, it says things like, we have to make sure that AI doesn't rival human intelligence. We have to make sure that it doesn't outnumber us, outsmart us, make us obsolete, and replace us. We have to make sure that we don't lose control of it. And from the wording, you can say what the letter is very concerned with is the idea of AI somehow waking up, becoming sentient, having its own agenda, and doing things that we have nothing to do with. The actual things, other things like misinformation, job automation, it's mentioned roughly in a footnote. But actually, it's really about this idea of AI completely waking up and taking over control of our society. After that, interesting enough, another letter was issued in June, where all of the nuance was completely abandoned. And that public letter said, oh, we have to take the risk of AI waking up and enslaving us just as seriously as we have to take the risk of pandemic and nuclear wars. Right? That's heavy. That's heavy and also untrue because there is no scientific evidence that we are on a path to sentient AI. In fact, there's not even evidence that such a path even exists. The issue in reality is that we have a bunch of other issues that we have to deal with that are far more less, science fiction-y and maybe not as exciting. But those things are here right now, and we really have to deal with it. And I think that this focus on AI running away from us is really, really problematic in that sense, because it's taking away the focus and the oxygen out of the room to think about the actual issues. And again, just with AI, those are areas of law that I think are all completely being disrupted because of it. Algorithms do need data. Yeah, that means they're just grabbing everything that they can find on the internet. But data doesn't grow on trees, it belongs to somebody. People do have intellectual property rights. And that means things for people who publish as well as for artists, but their data is being taken away and repurposed without them being asked. We already talked about the issues of misinformation and what that means from a regulatory perspective and how convincing it is. One of the things that is never really mentioned is the environmental impact of those technologies. Data doesn't grow on trees. It needs a lot of resources. It needs a lot of water, it needs a lot of space, it needs a lot of electricity. So just to give you an idea, if one training session of ChatGPT requires the same amount of energy like 126 Danish households in a whole year, one training session, to cool a data center, because you need to cool the servers in a data center. That's necessary. In order to cool the servers in a data center, medium-sized data center, you need 360,000 gallons of water every day. An interaction with ChatGPT, 20 questions, costs us half a liter of water. Those are resources that nobody talks about. Data doesn't grow on trees. It's not organic. It costs us something, and it costs us something here and now. We already talked about the issue of workplace automation and what that means for society if people might not have their jobs anymore. We talked about discrimination, how discrimination law might not be good enough for that purpose either. Data protection, your data is being taken, but it is yours, and it can be used against you because, for example, you could use ChatGPT to find out intimate information about other people. With prompt engineering, you get ChatGPT to tell you something about a person that person doesn't want to have disclosed, which can then lead to reputational damage if that information is being spread about you. And of course, journalism and academia, the truth seekers in our society, their field is being disrupted, and that is a big issue, especially because we rely on them. So those are the real issues. And unfortunately, around the world, as well as in the UK, policymakers started buying into the idea that this is not the real battle. The real battle is that speculative fiction one, where we worry about the killer robots at some point taking over. And you can actually see this here with the recent announcement of the government of the AI Safety Summit, which will be held on 1st or 2nd of November, which is like the governance actually good idea of having a flagship event to position themselves as a leader in AI, which I think is a fantastic idea. But the whole focus of that summit is none of the issues that we have discussed. It is all about AI safety in the sense of making sure we don't lose control of AI. In fact, in the scope, it actually says that it doesn't want to talk about misinformation and disinformation, about discrimination or workplace automation. Those are things that are not as important at the moment. We need to talk about losing control of AI. And I think even though it's a very powerful narrative, it's a very wrong narrative because AI isn't an alien that lands on our planet and now we have to negotiate with it. And we'd be like, please, please, please listen to our values and laws. No, we created it. Right? We built it. Every design decision is an ethical decision. How biased the system is a design decision. How transparent it is a design decision. How much data it needs is a design decision. It wasn't born that way. We made it that way. And just saying that we now have to plead that it still listens to us is taking away the responsibility of the people who built those systems that know what they were doing. So this is just from the policy perspective, but again, it's not just in the UK where I think there's a little bit of a trouble here. It's not much better on a European level. Many people will know that the European Union is proposing the AI Act, or is proposed. It's probably going to come into force either end of this year or next year. And again, the framework has really good points in it, and there's good stuff that I'm really happy about. It has this risk-based approach where you think about where technology is being deployed, and depending on how risky it is, there are certain rules that you have to follow, which is a really good idea. And the most interesting part at a high-risk application where the legislator said, here are 8 different categories that we believe are high risk. So if you deploy AI in one of those, you have to make sure to follow certain rules. None of that is banned, but you have to do certain risk assessment and documentation. You have to give certain information to people, that type of stuff, right? But if you look at it, it doesn't really deal with any of the things that we have discussed. Like, it doesn't really talk about the misinformation issue. It does talk about employment, but it doesn't talk about what we would do if people are being displaced. It just says if you use AI for employment, be transparent about it. It doesn't talk about what it means for the workforce that are being displaced. This discussion of whether we should use it is not at all discussed at all. That is something that was completely left out. The AI Act presupposes that the AI is here to stay, and here's how we deal with it. It never asks the question of what would happen to the people that are already working in those areas. With bias, same thing. It's not really mentioned here. It's really mentioned like once or twice, but it doesn't tell you anything. You have to examine those biases. But it doesn't talk about what bias. It doesn't talk about new types of biases, the new groups that we have discussed. None of that is mentioned at all. But this is an issue because it really doesn't get enough to the core of the issue. The interesting thing, again, about the AI Act is that developers have to follow the legal framework, but they also have to follow the accompanying standards. So you have the AI Act that will come into force by the end of the year, and then there will be another 2 years or so where standards are being developed that are supposed to give more detail on that framework, because this is just an overarching idea, and the details and nitty-gritty, that's what comes in the standards. The interesting thing about the standards is who writes those standards. In the European Union, it's common that this is being done by CEN and CENELEC, which are the standard-setting bodies in Europe. Those are not public entities, they are private entities. So they're not democratically legitimized to do so, yet they are the ones that are setting the standards. And plus, they invite people from industry to be on the working groups as well. So you have CEN, CENELEC plus industry writing those standards for themselves. Other entities like NGOs or civil society, they only have so-called observer status, which means they get a seat on the table, some of them, but they don't get any voting rights. And then the question is, how can you be sure that they're actually following those rules? The issue is that they do this with self-assessment. So a developer at some point did not only write the rules that they need to follow, they're also assessing whether they actually comply with those rules. And of course, it could work, but it could also go terribly wrong. And the other issue is that people don't really have individual level rights to complain against any of this. What is the good news? Just very quickly, because don't leave you with just bad news, is that it's not over. The reason why I'm doing this is to show that the fight is not over. In fact, the European Parliament has proposed amendments to it, and I really hope this will go through. This is why I'm trying to raise awareness around this. For example, they have now suggested that recommender system that can contribute to misinformation should be a high-risk system. So that would be one way of dealing with that, especially when it comes to systems that can impact the electoral system. And they have proposed that you should have a right to complain and that you should have a right to explanation. And again, we're in trialogue, so we don't know what the final version would be, but the Parliament has proposed this. Unfortunately, nothing is in there about the conformity assessment, or the fact that I certify whether I comply myself after I've written the rules for myself. There's nothing in there, but there's also still room to get amendments in if needed. And the last good news is that I want to dismantle the fake news that the genie is out of the bottle and there's nothing we can do about it, that AI is here to stay and you either jump on the train or you're going to be left behind. That is a rhetoric that we have to question, and we have to ask who is telling us this information. It's usually people who have an interest that the genie is out of the bottle, rather than they're talking about truth and reality. Every time there is a new technology, we have a hype cycle. That means autonomous cars, the metaverse, NFTs, crypto. Every time something like that happens, people say, the world's never going to be the same. But that wasn't always true. And it wasn't true because people said, that's actually not technology I want to have. I don't want to adopt it. It's not useful for me. And that's what I want to get across. Like, the fight is not over. We are the ones that get to decide if the genie is out of the bottle or not, because we are the ones that shape technology if we want to. We are the ones that can decide if you want to adopt it. And we have a say in how to regulate, so we can make sure that technology serves us and not the other way around. Thank you very much.
Thank you very, very much. I'm very conscious that Sandra has to catch a train shortly, so I'm going to rush through a few questions. I think one of the issues that concerns me as a scientist myself is that it's quite difficult to see that basic principle of science, the replicability from the original data. There is so much silence around how the algorithms work.
Yes.
And for the layman, which is most of us, I suspect, you can't see what it does.
Yes.
And therefore you don't know what bits of data within it are correct. So if we go back to the bit about the retina and the mouse, that group of abstract things that are used in, say, job appointments,
Yeah.
where did they get the evidence from, and how robust is it, and what would happen if you tested that?
Yes, I love that question, and it's exactly the right question. We don't know, and that's the issue. So what you're pointing at is that there is a scientific thirst, or even need, to not just look at correlation, but also think about causation. So correlation just means that two things happening at the same time, but it doesn't mean that one is impacting the other, or that they're even connected. And so as good scientists, we are interested in correlation because it shows us where we have to look, but then the journey starts and we have to figure out how those things are actually connected. Algorithms disrupt this because they don't care about this at all, and we don't care about it either anymore. We just say there's a correlation, and the correlation is good enough, a good enough indication that there's something going on, and I don't know what, and I don't care about it at all. In fact, algorithms are used to find correlations. That's their whole job. Without, sorry, AI is getting angry at me.
So if we go back to the job, just
Yes.
I'm just using this as an example.
Yes.
How do they know they've got it right? So if you're applying an algorithm model through a PR department and working in multiple companies,
Yeah.
how later on do they know whether that algorithm has hired the right people?
Yes, we actually never really know for sure, right? Because we never know what would have happened with the people that we didn't get the job. So we don't actually know if we made the right decision, but we assume that their algorithm will have some indication that, for example, I don't know, if you are somebody that downloads a browser over another, that you're more tech savvy, and that means that you may be going to be longer at the job. But whether we're right or not, we don't actually know. And we don't know it because there are certain things that are just completely impossible to predict. First of all, what makes a good worker is subjective. Whether somebody stays on the job is impacted by so many things that science could never comprehend. So really knowing whether we're right or not, we don't. We just can do our best guess, and that's what algorithms do. They do guesswork. But we believe that they know something. We think they're so intelligent, but in reality, we don't.
Thank you so much. On that very point, surely the question is not, does the algorithm know that it's picked the right person for the job, but is it better than a human interview panel doing the same thing?
Yes. And again, the question is what better means. Better, it's definitely faster. It's definitely cheaper, if that's what better means. But the algorithm doesn't sit down and think about, I wonder what makes a good job applicant. Like, there is no critical thinking about the capabilities that a human has to have in order to be a good employee. It's just mimicking what it has seen in the past. It's not coming up with new ideas. It's just learning from our past. So it's just finding new creative ways to do the same thing that we have been doing. So in a way, it's not better, it is the same. The issue is, though, it gives us the impression that it is somehow neutral, because people are biased. People don't know that they're biased. Algorithms, this is just math. How can math be biased? But obviously it is, because the data that is fed into it carries the legacy of past discrimination in it. But we think it's more neutral. And so in a way, it's more harmful because it's faster. It operates on a larger scale. And it's discriminating in a way that we wouldn't anticipate. So it's, in a way, worse. Good news is, if you know about it, you can do something about it, you can test it. Like, you can actually try to open up the black box and figure out how biased it actually is. You can't redo that with a human. You can crack open their head and figure out what's going on. So, but you have to first accept that by default, that thing will be biased, and then you have to do something against it. And if you crack it open and figure out where the bias lies, you can do something about it. But it means to admitting first that there's a problem, and then you could actually solve it. And then you could come to the point that you want to get at, that you actually make fairer decisions than you used to. But it requires an active step. If you just let it run, it's going to make things worse. If you do something, it makes things better. Sorry.
Thanks, Sandra. One of the problems you didn't talk about with AI is the effect of the internet eating itself, and the Ouroboros problem of AI-trained systems creating data, which then is used to train more AI systems.
Yes.
Related, I saw a good joke last week which said that the most useful and valuable thing in 5 years' time will be a copy of Wikipedia on a USB stick from 2022 or something, because it will all just fall apart as everything eats itself.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. What you probably need to do is just clean up the internet at some point, which is really problematic because the internet doesn't forget. The internet will never forget anything. Anything that you put online will always be online. And you're absolutely right that we come in a situation where there's just so much information and wrong information, and it's just going to be, as you said, eating itself. And that's a whole other harm that I didn't touch upon, but I fully agree with.
Older algorithms were presented with a training data set,
yes,
which grew as required. So that argument says that they no longer have human control over the training data set. The data set is being sucked in on its own account. Is that correct?
Well,
because otherwise you could take your last slide and say maybe you should make the people who design the training data set accountable for the consequences of their action.
I'm absolutely saying that. I'm absolutely saying that the people who are making the design decisions should be held accountable. It's never going to be an algorithm in my mind that should be held responsible. And the idea that algorithms just do what they want without being asked again, that's not really how it works, right? There is still a person who makes a decision to use a certain data set or to use it for a specific application. And that person has to carry the responsibility if it fails. The idea that algorithms carry a responsibility in itself is problematic from a legal perspective.
As a law lecturer, I do understand your point that, when it comes to misinformation and discrimination, we still haven't lost the fight because, as you said, there's a lot of things we can do in terms of, changing the design of AI.
Yeah.
But one question I had in mind is, what do you envisage as a potential solution, AI replacing the workforce? As a lecturer, I often tell my students, would you want to see a robot teaching you the AI model? Probably can do a better job than me. So in terms of, replacement of the actual labor, I was thinking, could you look at tax laws, perhaps?
Yeah.
What are the solutions you have in mind?
Absolutely, yes. It's one slide I skipped over because I was running out of time, but your point was on that slide, actually, which was, what would we do instead? Because, we might not know that what kind of jobs will be replaced and which ones will be created, but we already know that people want to pay their rent. We already know that today. And so what that means, we have to make sure that we have regulation that, for example, guarantees minimal wages for people, that we think about people have to robo-taxes, automation taxes, that if you automate part of your workforce, you should pay tax for it, which then would make up the hole that we have in the budget. The same as universal basic services, for example, to make sure that you're still being protected even though you might have lost your job. But again, that's a very unpopular thing to say, which just means we need more money because that's the opposite of what you do. When you automate, you want to cut money. But that is the core of what needs to happen, is to think about labor law and employment strategies on that scale, exactly what you said.
Look, ladies and gentlemen, I'm really sorry to cut the question short. I'm very anxious that Sandra gets her train. It's been a delight to have you here talking to us. I hope you've learned something and not been too frightened by what's going to happen. We can hide I hope those bad actors behind an algorithm somewhere else. Sandra Wachter, thank you very much.
Thank you.